They didn't look up when I pulled in. Morning fog still curled around the edges of the basin, softening the outlines of the yachts, new, polished, motionless. My old skiff, the Morning Star, creaked as it touched the dock. She always announced herself. That hull had more years on it than some of the dockhands' fathers. I stepped out slow, not out of pride, not weakness either, just age and habit. The rhythm of the sea was still in my knees. The harbor manager was standing under the awning, clipboard in hand. He barely glanced at me before turning to the others. "We don't serve people like you." The words dropped sharp, not shouted, just spoken like fact. I didn't argue, didn't explain the 30-foot waves I once cut through in pitch dark, didn't mention the nights off the Aleutians, or the Inuit kids we helped evacuate with frostbitten feet, didn't speak of the medals I never hung. That wasn't the point. Instead, I reached into my coat and pulled out my old Navy ID. The edges were soft, like a letter carried too many times. The photo was faded, almost colorless. But the badge was still there, and so was the rank. Master Chief Petty Officer, U.S. Navy, retired. He didn't even look at it, just turned away. I stood there a moment longer. No one moved. Dockhands kept coiling lines. A tourist couple stared, then looked down. No one intervened, not even a nod. I turned back to the boat, didn't say a word. 2 days later, 6 Navy vessels appeared offshore. Not ceremonial, not planned. Destroyers, a supply ship, a command vessel flying colors. And from the first small boat ashore came a figure in dress blues, Rear Admiral, crisp, decisive, walking the length of the dock with a purpose that cut through every whisper. He stopped when he saw me, then turned to the crowd, voice low but unwavering. "I'm here for Ethan Hale, because sometimes we forget heroes, until duty reminds us. I was born with salt in my lungs and rope burns on my fingers." Winter of 1941, Cutler, Maine. My father fished cod, my mother mended nets, and the sea, cold and cruel, taught us faster than school ever could. I could gut a haddock before I learned my letters. By the time I was 10, I could steer through kelp beds in fog thick enough to swallow whole islands. That's where I learned patience, and where I learned silence. Lessons that stayed with me long after the boots were off. In 1959, I left home with a duffel bag, a second-hand coat, and a promise I hadn't yet learned how to keep. The Navy recruiter barely looked at me twice, until I answered every technical question without pause and tied a bowline one-handed behind my back. I remember his smirk. "You're one of those coast boys, always either stubborn or drowned." I said nothing. He signed me in. Boot camp cut through the soft parts. They shaved our heads, broke our routines, and drilled order into the cracks where childhood used to be. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak much either. That earned me a nickname, Stone. Some of the men tried to break me early. Couldn't. I wasn't being tough. I just already knew the rhythm of hard work and silence. My first assignment was on the USS Buchanan, guided missile destroyer. Fast, tight crew. I started below decks, working maintenance. Then came radio duty. Then rescue drills. I never climbed fast, but I never got passed over. Quiet earns you time in the Navy, and when you use it well, it earns you trust. They saw that I didn't panic, that I made others calmer by standing still. That's what got me selected for SAR, search and rescue. By 1967, I was deployed in the Pacific, pulling sailors from typhoon-ravaged waters and hauling broken bodies from decks soaked in diesel and blood. You learn something about people when you're the last hand they see before the water takes them. You learn even more when you're the one who makes sure they don't go under. There was a mission in '73 off the Alaskan coast. An intelligence tip had come in. Small vessel, unregistered, drifting too close to U.S. waters. When we intercepted, it turned out to be a decoy. The real target was 3 clicks north, hauling unmarked crates. Narcotics, likely. I coordinated the interception under heavy fog. We boarded fast, restrained the smugglers, and recovered over 20 million in heroin. No shots fired, no casualties, just clean work. I was promoted to Chief Petty Officer 2 months later. But the moment that stuck, the one I still dream about, happened in 1978. We were stationed off the coast near the Aleutian chain. A blizzard was settling in, whiteout conditions, sub-zero wind chill. A distress call came in from a civilian research outpost. 2 glaciologists trapped in an ice fissure. Their vehicle had flipped. Broken radio. Broken bones. Hypothermia already setting in. Chopper couldn't land. Fixed wing was too risky. Command asked for volunteers. I stepped forward. I remember the cold more than the fear. The way it crawled into the joints. The way it made metal scream when you touched it. I remember strapping into the harness and descending, 1 careful inch at a time, knowing the ice could give way beneath me. I remember their faces when I reached them, one dazed, the other unconscious. I remember lifting them one at a time into the basket, signaling the hoist, then climbing out alone, wind tearing at the line. Both lived. I never asked for a commendation. Didn't go to the ceremony. The Meritorious Service Medal came in a small box. The Silver Star, too. I put them both in a drawer. Somewhere along the way, they made me Master Chief. That rank didn't change me. It just made the silence heavier. People saluted faster. Called me sir. I corrected them less and less. When I retired in '87, I had logged over 28 years. I had no children. No wife waiting. I'd lost one, once. A girl from Stonington who couldn't stand the long absences and the short conversations when I was home. I don't blame her. I chose the Navy, and the Navy asked me never to explain why. So I didn't. I just served. When I stepped off my last ship, no speeches were made. No brass band. Just a hand on the shoulder from my CO and a single word, steady. That was enough. I bought a truck, found Harborview on a map, and started over. I built the Morning Star with my own hands. White cedar, oak ribs, no shortcuts. She was a skiff. Simple and clean. No motors larger than needed. No rails. No fuss. Some folks in town called it quaint. I called it mine. I never told anyone about the Silver Star. Didn't mention the rescues. Didn't hang a single photograph. Service, real service, doesn't echo loud. It's the thing you do when no one's watching and you don't expect thanks. I just kept sailing. When I first docked the Morning Star in Harborview, no one paid me much mind. That suited me just fine. The big boats kept to the new slips, white hulls, chrome railings, full crews in matching polos. The old dock, the public one, was still half-rotten and salt-stained, but the lines held. That's all I needed. Someplace to tie off, to rinse the deck, to breathe brine like breath. At first, I used the skiff to fish, halibut mostly, crab traps when the season opened. But I didn't need the money. Navy pension paid enough to keep me fed, roof overhead. It was never about income. It was about staying close to the water, keeping the rhythm alive. And eventually, I started bringing others along. It began with a neighbor boy, Adam. His father worked double shifts at the shipyard. His mother was gone. The boy wandered down to the dock each afternoon, tossing stones, and looking like he might jump in just to feel something. I gave him rope, showed him knots. The next day, I taught him how to read the tide charts. A week later, he was on deck with gloves on, hauling line. From there, word spread. I never made a flyer, never charged a dime. But kids came. Boys, girls, some in trouble, some just lost. They sat in the stern, scared to speak. By the time we hit open water, they were laughing like wind. I taught them everything I knew, how to plot a bearing, tie a bowline, gauge weather by cloud shape. I made them work for it. They swabbed decks. They got wet. They learned to listen. I called it the Morning Star program, unofficially. There were no records, no grants, no paperwork. Just me, the boat, and whoever showed up. I kept a list in my coat pocket, names, dates, favorite knot. At the end of every trip, I gave them one thing, a small wooden token I'd carve. On one side, an anchor. On the other, the word, steady. That's what mattered most at sea. For a few years, it was good. Then came the new marina expansion. Developers said it was progress. Bigger slips, luxury amenities, automated fueling, yacht concierge. The old harbor office was torn down. In its place rose a glass-paneled tower with a rooftop lounge and a private club for patrons of maritime distinction. I was none of those things. They raised slip fees, doubled them, then added regulations, noise restrictions, scheduling protocols, minimum vessel length requirements. Quietly, the smaller boats were pushed to the far end of the basin, then out entirely. I applied for a maintenance waiver. Denied. Non-commercial vessels do not meet compliance. They sent me a letter, unsigned, asking me to relocate operations to a more suitable venue. The nearest public dock was 17 miles north. I kept sailing anyway. Kids still came. Not as many. Some parents were nervous now, said the marina didn't feel safe anymore. Others just couldn't make the drive. Then one morning, I arrived at the dock and found a laminated sign bolted to the piling. No private instruction or youth activities permitted without authorization. No warning. No hearing. No explanation. I brought the sign to the harbor office. The new manager, slick-haired and wearing a blazer with gold piping, glanced at it and said, "It's policy now. Liability concerns." I asked if they'd reviewed my background. He smirked. "Sir, your military record doesn't qualify you for educational licensing." I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice. I just turned and walked out. The next day, a man with a clipboard took photos of the Morning Star, said it was a compliance check, asked for registration, insurance, certifications. I gave him what I had. He jotted notes, didn't look me in the eye. A week later, they posted a formal citation. Failure to meet facility standards. No fine, just a warning. A second citation would mean revocation of docking privileges. I showed it to Adam, now 19, applying to maritime college. "They don't want you here," he said, voice tight. "I know, I replied. I still sailed. Fewer kids came now, some too scared, some blocked by rules their parents couldn't navigate. The docks grew quieter. The Morning Star looked smaller between fiberglass giants with names like Serenity and Pacific Dream. One morning, I pulled into my usual slip and found a powerboat tied there. No notice, no explanation. When I asked the dockhand, he shrugged. It's a paid berth now. Reserved. But I've had this slip for years. He looked embarrassed. I know. Orders from above. I moored further down, near the edge where algae slicked the pylons and seabirds picked at rope. I didn't blame the young men working the docks. They were just following orders. But each time they turned away, each rule they enforced, chipped something loose inside me. Not anger, not sorrow, just a slow unraveling of the fabric that had once held this place together. And so, by the time I stood on that brisk morning and heard the harbor manager say, "We don't serve people like you," I wasn't surprised. I was just tired. I showed the badge anyway. Master Chief Petty Officer. Still mine. Still true. And not a single person moved. That morning, the wind carried salt inland. Not sharp, but steady, like it wanted to remind the shore it was still connected to something deeper. I tied off the Morning Star, knowing it might be for the last time. My hands didn't shake. They never did at sea. It's only when you step back on land that the tremors come. The harbor was unusually full, spring bringing in early tourists, yacht crews, and vendors setting up for the boating expo. Everything gleamed. The chrome, the paint, the smiles. All polished, all curated. And then there was me, old canvas coat, oil-spotted cuffs, hands that still smelled of rope and cedar. I wasn't part of the show. Never had been. After the harbor manager said those words, "We don't serve people like you," something in the air shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No gasps, no shouts, just a stillness. Like someone had cut the volume on the whole marina. I looked at him once, then reached into my pocket and pulled out the old badge. Thumbed it open. It had seen better days. The corners frayed, the lamination cracked. But the photo was still there, and so was the line of print. Hale, Ethan, Master Chief Petty Officer, U.S. Navy, Ret. He didn't flinch. Didn't bother to read it. Just stared through me like I'd never belonged. I put it back in my coat, tied off the last line, and left. Didn't know then that someone had been watching. His name was Leo Alvarez, 17, junior at Harborview High. Quiet, ROTC cadet. Never spoke to me before, but I'd seen him once or twice at the docks, helping an old neighbor unload groceries, sweeping sand off the walkways with practiced, unnecessary precision. He had the look of someone who wanted to belong. Leo had a phone in his hand that morning. Filmed the whole thing, my skiff against a wall of yachts, the manager's voice cutting me down, my badge held out, ignored. You could barely hear my voice, but the silence said enough. He uploaded the video that night. Didn't add music. Didn't edit. Just posted it with one line beneath. That's Master Chief Hale. By morning, it had over 3,000 shares. By evening, 50,000. Leo never said anything to me, but his classmates did. One by one, they began to repost. Some wrote, "He taught me knots." Others shared photos, me on the deck with 5 kids smiling around a map. One showed me handing over a carved anchor token. The local VFW caught wind. Then the regional paper. And somewhere in the chain of screens and shares, it reached General Laura Spencer, retired, USMC, Bronze Star, former commanding officer of the Pacific Joint Rescue Command. She'd met me once, briefly, in 1978. I'd pulled her brother from a fractured hull off the coast of Kodiak. I remembered the rescue. I didn't know the names, but she remembered mine. According to the article that followed, Spencer watched the video 3 times before she made her first call. First, to a contact in the Navy Public Affairs Office. Then, to the current Rear Admiral stationed in San Diego. Finally, to Naval Base Kitsap, closest to Harborview. She asked only one question. What is being done about Ethan Hale? They didn't have an answer. The next morning, she was on a plane. 2 days after the video went live, the Navy ships started appearing off the coast. At first, no one noticed. A few locals saw something on the horizon. Thought it was drills, maybe a coincidence. But 6 vessels don't idle quietly. They make a statement by existing. They carry weight, not just in steel and firepower, but in memory. One by one, they anchored offshore. Destroyers, a supply vessel, a command ship flying full colors, sailors in dress uniforms standing at silent attention on deck. No press, no spectacle, just presence. The crowd at the harbor swelled. Tourists turned from brochures. Locals leaned over rails. Dockhands paused their work. And then she appeared. General Spencer herself. Full dress, white gloves, no entourage. She walked the dock with purpose, every step sharp, boots clicking against the old boards like they belonged more than anyone else's ever had. She scanned the faces, stopped when she saw me, didn't hesitate, didn't smile, just walked straight toward me and said, "Master Chief Hale, sir." The silence cracked. People turned. A few lowered their phones. A couple of dockhands straightened up like they were about to be called into formation. Spencer looked me in the eye. "You don't remember me. That's all right. I remember you." Then she turned to the harbor manager. "This town tried to bury your legacy beneath facades. I'm here to reclaim it." The harbor manager opened his mouth. Spencer raised her hand. Just a slight motion. Enough to silence him. She looked out to the crowd. This man led more rescue missions than most officers see deployments. He taught seamanship, not with theory, but with hands, time, and sacrifice. He gave this town dignity when it forgot its own bearings. Then she turned back to me. "The Navy remembers, Master Chief." "We remember." Behind her, a detachment of sailors stepped forward from the crowd. Uniforms crisp. One by one, they saluted. No commands, no choreography, just one gesture. Straight backs, eyes steady, hands raised. For me, for the skiff that still smelled of brine, for the silence that had never once demanded thanks, but had finally been answered. When the last sailor lowered his salute, no one moved. Not the tourists, not the dockhands, not the harbor staff who had, just days before, turned their backs. They all stood still, unsure what to say or whether they were supposed to say anything at all. But I didn't need noise. I never had. What mattered stood already before me. Respect returned without condition, not begged for, not bartered. General Spencer looked me in the eye again. "We're not just here for show, Master Chief. We've come to make something right." I nodded, slow. "I didn't ask for this." "I know," she said, a faint smile pressing the corners of her mouth. "That's why you deserve it." She turned toward the edge of the pier. One of the Navy crew handed her a folder, thick with printed documents, each page sharp with new ink and new intent. "These are redesignation papers," she said, "authorizing this dock as a Navy-supported educational berth. Effective immediately." I blinked once. "Say again." "This place doesn't get to pretend it's too clean for its own roots. You taught seamanship here. You mentored youth here. You upheld the highest standards of naval service on this dock when no one else was watching. So we're anchoring that history legally." She passed the folder to a local official, a young woman I barely recognized. Assistant city manager, I later learned. The woman flipped through the contents, eyes widening as she read. Behind her, the harbor manager watched, his hands stiff at his sides. "No clipboard, no smirk now," Spencer continued. "The Morning Star will remain here as long as you choose. And starting today, this dock becomes the home of a pilot mentorship program, operated in partnership with the United States Navy. Volunteer-based, fully funded." I was silent. I had words, but they didn't come easy. Never had. Behind me, Adam stepped forward. Now 20, taller than me, jaw set hard like someone who had learned from storms. "I'll help run it," he said. Voice solid. Spencer looked at him. "You served under him?" "Still do." She smiled. More sailors approached, some from the ships, others from different walks. Retirees, young recruits, even a couple I recognized from old base postings. They didn't come to be seen. They came to be counted. One brought a folded flag, presented not to bury but to raise. Another laid a thick envelope on the dock. Letters from youth I had once taught, collected over years. Dozens of them. I remember how he taught me to tie a reef knot. He told me to always respect the ocean, and myself. I didn't have a father. He showed up anyway. I didn't know whether to stand straighter or step back. I chose neither. I stayed still, the way I always had, until storms passed or commands changed. A boy stepped forward, 12 maybe, braces flashing, two small shoes scuffed from the pier. "My dad said you saved a life once." "I tried to save many," I replied. He nodded. "He said he was one of them." He handed me a carved piece of driftwood, no larger than my palm. The anchor I had carved all those years ago, his name still etched faint on the back. "Thanks," he said. The mayor showed up late. Camera crew in tow, shirt a little too pressed, handshake too quick. He asked for a photo. Spencer obliged. I didn't. "There are some things you don't lend to ceremony." He gave a speech, something about honoring tradition, valuing community service, building bridges across generations. I let him talk. When it ended, the crowd stayed, not because of the speech, but because the ships hadn't moved. The Navy presence was not symbolic. They worked. Sailors cleaned algae off the dockside pylons, repaired broken planks, painted the railings that had chipped down to bare wood over years of weather and neglect. It was as if the military muscle had shifted from force to care. That night, Harborview fell quiet, not embarrassed, humble. There's a difference. At dusk, I returned to the Morning Star. She looked the same, but felt different. Not because of what had happened, but because someone had finally looked at her, truly seen her, and understood what she carried. Spencer stood near the bow. "May I ask you something, Ethan?" she said. I nodded. You never spoke of the missions. Never sought recognition. Why? I looked at the water. It was never about being seen. It was about knowing someone made it home. That's all. She nodded slowly. That's more than enough. We stood there a while. No cameras. No clapping. Just two uniforms and a boat that had never needed a flag to know where she belonged. The ship stayed for a week. Not docked. Not flaunting. They sat just offshore like quiet sentinels, their flags rising with the sun, sailors at morning watch, decks orderly as tide. Harborview's rhythm changed. Tourists walked slower. Locals lingered near the waterfront. Even the seabirds seemed to adjust their course, circling wider, softer, as if the water now held a different gravity. The dock transformed. What had once been old wood and salt-rusted cleats now gleamed with care. The Navy crews didn't just patch, they restored. Railings were reinforced, benches sanded, paint layered carefully like memory being preserved. The Morning Star received a full revarnish. Hull sealed, lines replaced, sailcloths inspected. I watched quietly from the edge, a stranger to the attention, unsure how to carry the weight of recognition. The Navy set up a small modular office at the end of the pier, not intrusive, but functional. Volunteers rotated in and out, some active duty, some retired, some just locals with calloused hands and steady eyes. Together, we created something new, the Morning Star program, official now, named, sanctioned, funded. It wasn't about formal curriculum. There were no chalkboards, no lectures. Instead, we taught like the sea teaches, through movement, observation, silence. Each week, groups of kids arrived, some wide-eyed, some hardened too early. They came from shelters, youth centers, overworked schools. We met them where they were, not where someone wished they'd be. First lesson, coil a line. Second, read the water. Third, trust your hands more than your mouth. I taught with the same voice I used at sea, low, precise, rarely raised. That tone cuts through panic better than shouting ever could. The kids responded. They weren't used to quiet that listened back. They learned the parts of the boat like anatomy. Learned to respect weight, wind, and each other. Sometimes they cried. Not loudly. Not always where I could see. But the boat had a way of pulling grief out like tide pulling kelp. I didn't ask questions. They told what they needed to, when they were ready. One girl, barely 12, traced the calluses on my hands and asked, "Does it hurt?" "Not anymore," I said. "Mine do," she replied. We kept sailing. Word spread. Teachers visited. Parents, slowly, too. Local mariners came back, some ashamed they hadn't spoken sooner. I told them shame didn't help the wind blow. They picked up paintbrushes, chart books, toolkits. Everyone found a role. General Spencer returned once a month. Never made a speech. Just showed up, walked the dock, checked on the ledger. We spoke only a few words at a time. That was enough. She understood silence better than most. The harbor changed with the program. It wasn't the buildings or banners. It was the tone. Where once there was detachment, now there was presence. Where once there was display, now there was purpose. And in that shift, the town remembered something it had forgot. Dignity isn't granted by policy. It's returned by recognition. One afternoon, I found a boy sitting on the bow, legs swinging, dirty sneakers, untied. He looked familiar. I asked his name. "Leo," he said. He was the one who'd filmed the video. I nodded. Sat beside him. "You knew?" he asked. I figured. "You mad?" "No." He looked out at the water. "I didn't know it'd go that far. That's how the tide works. You stir it once, it goes where it must." He nodded. "You still filming?" "Sometimes. But not today." We sat there a long while, silence stitched with gull cries and sail snaps. Weeks passed. Then months. Seasons turned, slow and dry. The salt air kept time better than calendars. Kids came, grew, left. Some returned, older, sure. One brought his own child. Another joined the Coast Guard. One wrote to say she became a marine engineer, because knots made more sense than people for a while. I kept their letters. In the small office beside the dock, we installed a weathered bulletin board. On it, photos, thank you notes, a map with pins where former students had landed. Above it, a carved plaque, "Steady hands, still water." Adam stayed close. Became co-director of the program. Taller than me now, voice deeper. But every time he tied off, he still double-checked the knots. "Habit," he said. I knew better. It was respect. One morning, a crew installed a plaque at my slip. Solid brass, bolts sunk deep into the dock. It read, "Master Chief Ethan Hale, Protector of Waters, Mentor to Many." Steady. I didn't watch them put it in. Just walked down at sunset and saw it glinting in the last light. A sailor stopped behind me. "Permission to come aboard?" he asked. I smiled. "Always. I've spent most of my life facing the water. Not because I was running from land, but because something out there always called me back. Maybe it was the sound, or the steadiness, or the fact that the sea doesn't pretend. It just is. Honest. Relentless. Demanding your best without needing to explain why. People ask now, more often than they used to, why I stayed silent all those years. Why I never shared the stories, never spoke of the silver star, never corrected the record when time and noise and pride tried to erase what little I'd carried back. But silence was never shame. It was service. And service, real service, isn't loud. It doesn't wave from rooftops or wait for applause. It's in the quiet decisions. The unseen hours. The hands that reach, not for medals, but for the next task. The next knot. The next kid who doesn't yet know what they're capable of. That morning on the dock, when the harbor manager looked at me and said I didn't belong, I felt no hate, just distance. The long ache of a world forgetting the shape of the people who once held it steady. That's what hurt, not the insult, but the fact that no one else noticed. Until one young man did. Leo didn't know me, but he recognized something that didn't sit right. He didn't argue. He didn't grandstand. He just held up his phone and gave the silence a voice. And that voice echoed across classrooms, across counties, across the ocean to ships whose decks I'd once walked in a younger man's skin. And then the Navy came, not to rescue me, but to stand beside me, to say, we remember. That matters more than I can explain. Not for my sake, but for the sake of every man or woman who carried something too heavy, too long, and never knew if it still counted. Now the dock bears a plaque. The morning star sails again. And the kids come steady, week after week, their hands growing stronger, their voices surer. They don't ask what I did. They ask how to do it themselves. That's the right question. I teach them what the sea taught me. Hold fast. Keep your bearings. Never abandon ship. But also, listen more than you speak. Stand your ground without drawing a line. And when the wind shifts, adjust your sail. Don't wait for the storm to end. Learn to read its language. Sometimes, in the middle of a lesson, I'll look up and see a Navy vessel far on the horizon. Just a shape against the sky. Sometimes it's coincidence. Other times, I think it's something else. A reminder that the watch never ends. That someone's still out there. That even old names carved into brass still cast long shadows. I don't plan to stop. I'll sail until my hands can't grip line, until the stars blur beyond recognition. And even then, I'll sit on the dock, pass on stories, tie one last knot. Not because the world asked me to, but because someone will still need a steady hand. I've come to believe legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you live quietly, daily, even when the world forgets to notice. Ethan Hale is just a name, a badge number, a record file in a metal drawer. But Master Chief, that's earned, that stays, that speaks, even when I don't. So if someone remembers me, let it be like this. A man who showed up, who didn't shout to be seen, who answered when no one else would. And when they told him to leave, he stood still, not to fight, but to remind them what standing means.